Welcome back. Tonight's story is another strange tale from the edges of the unknown. The kind of story people usually only tell when the fire is burning low and the world has gone quiet. So settle in, relax, and let the story unfold. And when it's over, let me know what you thought in the comments, what you liked, what you didn't, and what kind of stories you'd like to hear next.
A fragile lantern hung by a slender rope, swaying over the yawning chasm that cleaved Lismere's cliffside. Its pale, trembling light fought the thick sea mist curling upward from the abyss below, an otherworldly glow that had never faltered in centuries. Until now. Alara's fingers tightened around the lantern's cold frame as she stepped onto the rope bridge, the ancient ropes creaking beneath her weight. Every nerve screamed to look away, but she couldn't. Not when the light wavered like a dying breath. Beneath her, the chasm yawned wide and dark, waves smashing against jagged rocks half swallowed by fog. The lantern's pulse thinned, the glow dimming into a sickly flicker. A sudden sharp gust tossed salty spray across her face. Alara's heart pounded as she inched forward, every step a challenge against the brutal wind threatening to snatch the fragile light from the rope. "This can't be happening," she whispered. The ritual was failing. Behind her, the other lanterns hanging along the cliffs flickered desperately, their usual steady brilliance unraveling like threads in a fraying tapestry. Alara's breath steamed in the cold air as she reached the fragile lantern's anchor point and gripped the carved stone where the ancient sigils were etched. Her hands trembled, not from the wind, but from the weight of what was unraveling. The lanterns of Lismere were more than light. They held the city's fragile shield against the abyssal darkness that churned far below the waves. For centuries, the ritual that revived their glow had been flawless, passed down without question. Until now. From the edge of the chasm, a shiver ran through the mist. Shadows writhed just beyond sight. The darkness was climbing upward. Alara's eyes darted to the narrow path twisting back toward the city. Her father's words echoed, haunted by his sudden disappearance last season. The light is not what they say. The truth lurks where the shadows breathe. Why had he vanished on the eve of the ritual's renewal? Why had his warnings gone unheeded? The lantern flared weakly again, then dipped toward blackout. Alara gritted her teeth. The ritual's fragility was no accident. Someone, or something, was interrupting the light's ancient chant. She had to find the source. To save Lismere, she needed answers buried deeper than the phrase ancient ritual could reveal. With the cliff's howling wind tearing at her cloak, Alara launched herself across the rope bridge, the lantern swaying dangerously. Behind her, the fragile glow fought the swallowing abyss, but without her, the city would drown in darkness. The first step in the ritual, understanding everything that had been hidden, would begin tonight. Alara's fingers curled around the carved stone, the cold biting through her gloves as the southern lantern's frail light dwindled before her eyes. The sigils, once vibrant with power, now seemed faded, eroded not by time, but by something more deliberate. She knelt, tracing one ancient rune with trembling fingertips, feeling the hum of the ritual's energy flicker beneath the surface. But it was weaker here, like a wound refusing to heal. A sharp gust swept through the chasm, whipping salt spray against her face and rattling the lantern's fragile cage. The lantern's glass trembled, and for a long heartbeat, Alara feared it would shatter, plunging the city into darkness below. Her breath caught, mingling with the mist that curled like fingers around the cliffs. "Sabotage," she whispered, voice thin but resolute. It wasn't a guess or a desperate hope. The signs were unmistakable. The carved stones bore faint scratch marks, deliberate, precise, as if someone had clawed at the sigils, trying to steal their glow. The ancient ropes binding the lantern swayed unnaturally, knotted and frayed in places they shouldn't have been. The faint smell of shadow smoke hung in the cold air, a corrosive scent her father had once warned her about. Her pulse quickened, memories crashing over her. Her father's cryptic warnings, his frantic notes hastily scribbled in the margins of the ritual's tome, the day he disappeared like a ghost swallowed by the abyss. Alara rose, eyes scanning the cliff's jagged edge toward the city. The southern lantern was the first to falter, but if the others followed, Lismere would be vulnerable in hours. No one could survive the abyss's embrace without the lantern's ancient protection. And yet, Someone was dismantling that safety piece by piece. She gripped the ancient lantern's support beam, fingers tracing the grooves where the ropes intertwined. As if guided by instinct, her hand found a loose strand, one not weathered but freshly tampered with, slick with a faint residue she didn't recognize. She pulled gently, revealing a shallow groove beneath the rope, a thin, jagged cut deep enough to weaken the anchor if left unattended. "Elara!" a voice called, sharp against the wind. She spun toward the path winding down from the city. Torin, the elder ritual keeper, emerged from the fog, his lantern swaying at his side. His face was drawn tight with worry, eyes reflecting the dim glow of the failing light. "They told me the southern lantern was steady," he said, voice rough. "We've never had a failure in centuries." She met his gaze, the weight of truth heavy between them. "It's not just failure, it's sabotage. Someone's attacking the ritual from within. I found the cuts, the scratch marks on the stones. This wasn't chance." Torin's hands clenched at his sides. "Do you think this links to your father's disappearance?" Elara nodded, swallowing the lump rising in her throat. "He found something dangerous. The truth isn't buried in legends. It's in these lanterns and the people who guard them." The wind howled again, bending the ropes and flinging mist through the narrow spaces between cliff and city. The other lanterns flickered in a trembling chorus, resisting the pull of darkness. The abyss was patient, a creeping shadow that gnawed at Lismir's edges. "We must act quickly," she said. "If the southern lantern fails completely, the others will follow. The abyss will rise." Torin hesitated, then stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You'll need to search the vault beneath the city. Your father kept records there, hidden from prying eyes. It's dangerous, Elara. The vault is sealed tight, and the city watchers guard its secrets with suspicion." "Then it's the only place left," Elara replied, resolve hardening her voice. "If the saboteurs are still watching, if they silenced him, they'll do the same to me if I'm careless. But I won't let Lismir fall." She glanced back at the flickering southern lantern, the fragile flame teetering on the edge of oblivion. The abyss waited hungrily, eager to swallow the city whole. Torin's gaze followed hers. "Then we must prepare. The ritual isn't just light, it's knowledge, history, power. And if that knowledge is broken, so is the city." Elara looked to the narrow path threading back toward their brittle city, shadows lengthening as twilight deepened. Somewhere beneath the streets, in the vault her father once labored over, answers stirred like sleeping beasts. Her cloak billowed in the wind as she took a last, lingering look at the wavering lantern flame, a solitary beacon in a gathering storm. The first step into the dark was waiting. She turned toward the city and stepped forward, the weight of silence thick around her. The light of Hollowreach must not falter. Not yet. Elara tightened the straps of her satchel as the wind tugged insistently at her cloak. The rope bridges quivered beneath her boots, a thin web suspended between craggy cliffs and the heaving mass of the city wedged into their crevices. Below, the abyss muttered its endless hunger, shrouding the lower streets in a mist that rose like a living thing, curling and twisting between crooked rooftops. Each step forward was a test. The ropes groaned, shifting unpredictably, threatening to pitch her over the unsteady railings and into the yawning darkness. Her breath was shallow, lungs burning with the cold air, but she forced herself onward, eyes fixed on the crooked spires and glowing windows that marked the city proper. The farther she went, the heavier the atmosphere thickened. A pall of unease filtered through the salt tang of the sea air and the faint, acrid scent of smoldering lantern oil. Lanterns lining the narrow streets flickered erratically, their flames casting grotesque shadows that danced on uneven stone walls. It was as if even the light grew restless in Lismir tonight. Elara's fingers brushed the small charm at her neck, her father's last gift, before she swiped the rising panic away like a shadow. She had seen that flicker before, the southern lantern faltering against the abyss, not from age or neglect, but something more insidious. As she set foot onto the city's cobblestones, the air grew denser with murmurs. A silent throng had begun to gather, faces emerging from shuttered windows and narrow alleys, whispering, wary, and watchful. The usual nocturnal hum of the city was broken by low, restless chatter. "Lanterns failing again!" a raspy voice claimed from a clustered knot of dock workers, their weathered hands grasping at wooden crates like anchors against despair. "It's the curse returning," muttered an old woman, clutching a worn shawl close. Her eyes flicked to Alara, sharp and accusing beneath deep furrows. "Mark my words, once the lights go out, the abyss will come for us all." Alara forced a steadying breath and pushed through the crowd. She could hear more rumors, half-formed fears bleeding from alley mouths. "Where's the city watch? They say the guardians should keep this sort of thing sealed." "Fools. Those watchers play both sides. Secrets stink in Lismere." Every accusation, every grain of suspicion, bit into her resolve. How many had already turned against truth, frightened into superstition? The lanterns above sputtered, casting brief darkness that swallowed the faces around her. She glimpsed sharp eyes tracking her progress, calculating and cold. Some watchers, officials in threadbare cloaks adorned with the faded crest, stood within shadows near the market square, their hands poised near the hilts of knives and doubts. One of them stepped forward, voice low but cutting. "Ilara, the city whispers dangerous things. You would do well to tread lightly. Not all questions deserve answers." Her gaze hardened. "And silence makes us all prisoners, not just of fear, but of death. Until the southern lantern is restored, the abyss will crawl closer." Tension thickened the air like storm clouds. The watcher's eyes narrowed before he inclined his head with resigned warning. "Then be wary. There are those who would see this city consumed, and they do not hesitate." Alara slipped past them, heart hammering, the weight of their veiled threat pressing her forward. Narrow alleys clawed at the edges of the main street, dark veins twisting beneath the city's skin. She paused at a familiar corner, a weathered stone where the carved glyph of a lamp flame had once shone bright with her father's care, now just chipped and faint. Her fingers traced the worn symbol, memories flickering with it. A rough laugh echoed from deeper in the shadows. Figures emerged, ragged children with eyes too wide and smiles too hollow, their bodies slick with mist and dirt. They flitted like ghosts between the buildings, their whispers forming riddles lost beneath the cold wind. "You seek the vault," one said, voice suddenly clear and brittle. "But the vault remembers those who pry too deep." Alara's step faltered. "Who are you?" The children vanished into the night, leaving only that hollow warning dangling amid the cracked stones and dying lamps. The city settled around her shoulders again, an ancient weight of history, betrayal, and secrets buried beneath centuries of ash and salt. She knelt to peer through a damp grate near the tavern's back wall, heart quickening as she glimpsed the faint glow of phosphorescent moss lining the tunnel below, an entrance to the labyrinthine underbelly where the vault might lie. But the streets had grown colder, quieter. The unrest she'd felt thrummed like a low drumbeat beneath the surface, a warning as clear as the fading light of the southern lantern itself. Alara rose, determination thundering in her veins. Whatever waited in the vault, whatever hands had darkened the lantern's flame, she would find it, and face the watchers who lurked in shadow. The rope bridges had been perilous, the whispers chilling, but now the real journey began. The abyss was watching, and so was she. The chamber was colder than Alara had expected, not from the stone beneath her feet, but from the eyes that bore into her as she entered. The council's den sat beneath the council hall, a vaulted room lined with shadowed alcoves and tall iron sconces, their flames vacillating erratically, as if reluctant to share light. The heavy wooden door groaned shut behind her, sealing her in with the city's oldest and deadliest guardians. At the head of the semicircle, High Magistrate Thalin's gaunt face was set in a mask of deliberate calm. The others, the elder counselors, sat stiffly, robes rustling like dry leaves, their hands clasped as if to hold their secrets in place. Alara's pulse pounded, but she held her voice steady. "I have evidence," she began, drawing a folded parchment from beneath her cloak. The musty smell of old ink rose as she spread it across the polished oak table. Diagrams of the Southern Lantern's mechanism, annotated with strange runes not found in any common ritual manual, stained in smudges of soot. "This is no accident. The lantern's decay is deliberate. Someone has tampered with the wards, someone who understands the ritual's core." Thalin's eyes flickered to the diagrams, then narrowed. "Ilara, the rituals are ancient and immutable. You risk unsettling the balance with baseless suspicions. Alara swallowed, the chill of dismissal curling in her stomach. The Southern Lantern cannot fail under our watch. Yet it does. The runes bear marks of scraping and renewal, replaced hastily. Someone has interfered with the very magic we depend on. Counselor Malik barked a cold laugh. And if what you say were true, would you not tell us plainly who is responsible? You bring accusations without proof, only fear. I have traced the symbols to the vault beneath the city, Alara said quickly, leaning forward despite the gnawing in her gut. I have seen signs there, signs that match this tampering. I believe my father found this as well before he disappeared. Attention snapped across the room like a drawn bowstring. The magistrate's jaw clenched so tightly it seemed at risk of fracture. Another counselor, a woman with sharp, calculating eyes, gave a faint shake of her head. Your father's fate is a tragedy, Alara, and his pursuits have cost us dearly, she said, her voice silk dipped in ice. But these claims, they threaten the city's order. The lanterns hold because we will them to. To question that is to invite chaos. Alara's heart clenched, but her voice was iron. Then why hide the truth? Why deny the signs I bring? The ritual is breaking and the abyss grows hungry. There was silence, heavy and suffocating, before Thalon finally spoke, his voice low and weary. The council guards Lismir's stability. Our people would crumble beneath such revelations. It is not denial, but protection. Alara's eyes narrowed. Protection from what? From the past your laws erased? From what you buried beneath centuries of lies? A cold smile flickered from the sharp-eyed counselor again. Some truths are better left to rot where they fell. The abyss need not be glimpsed for its shadow to terrify. Discomfort twisted in Alara's gut. She had heard this before. The old veiled warnings her father whispered when she was a child. Warnings no one else dared acknowledge. The city's protectors were its jailers as well. Her hands curled tightly at her sides. Then you're part of this too. You've known all along and kept silent while the lanterns dimmed. The magistrate leaned forward, his voice barely a whisper now. There are forces older than us, Alara. Forces we must outwit, not confront openly. Your father's disappearance was a cautionary tale. He sought answers no one should have. Alara's breath caught, not in fear, but in fierce defiance. Then I will listen to those forces if I must, but I will not be silenced. Lismir deserves the truth. The counselors exchanged glances thick with unspoken warnings. The chamber's flickering echoes seemed to pulse with the weight of imminent judgment. Thalon rose slowly, shadows casting deep creases across his face. Very well, you have been heard. But be warned, the path you choose has peril beyond the dark that creeps beneath our streets. Do not let your quest be the flame that consumes us all. As Alara turned to leave, she caught the faintest movement, a figure seated quietly in an alcove she had not noticed before. A flash of recognition, a quick narrowing of eyes, and then, gone. Outside the council's den, the city breathed in muted breaths of stone and ash. Alara's hands trembled, but her resolve burned hotter than ever. The abyss was waiting, and so were the watchers. She would find the vault. She would uncover the proof, and she would illuminate the shadows the council so desperately hid. The narrow alley that led to her father's workshop was a crooked vein in the heart of Lismir's old quarter, a place where the city's breath felt colder, as if time itself had slowed. Alara's footsteps echoed softly on damp cobblestones mottled with moss and cracked by forgotten roots. The heavy air smelled faintly of burnt oil and dust, a scent she had once known intimately. The door to the workshop was weathered, its once bright paint peeling like brittle skin. She pressed her palm against the scarred wood, feeling the splinters bite beneath her fingers. The faded brass nameplate was nearly illegible. Asterisk Darren Voss, Artificer. Her father's name, faded but unyielding. Inside, the dim light of the late afternoon filtered through grimy panes, casting fractured shadows on the cluttered tables and scattered tools. Shelves sagged under the weight of arcane instruments, glass vials tipped with strange symbols, and countless copper gears waiting to spin. Despite months of neglect, the place felt charged, as if it still held a pulse beneath the stillness. Alara's eyes scanned the room, lingering on familiar objects. Her father's weathered leather apron folded over a chair, a half-finished lantern prototype resting among shards of crystalline glass, pages of scribbled sketches pinned to a corkboard. She moved carefully, as if the dust itself might betray some secret. Her fingers brushed against a stack of papers, brittle and yellowed with age. Nothing here made sense, at least not yet. Then, a faint glimmer near the edge of a cluttered workbench caught her eye. Hidden beneath wooden gears and fragments of broken glass, a small, ornate box lay tucked away, its surfaces carved with spiraling runes that pulsed faintly in the gloom. Alara's heart thudded as she lifted the box, its cool weight reassuring in her hands. She examined the lock, a mechanism unlike any she had seen, a puzzle forged with cunning precision. Using a slender blade from her belt, she traced the grooves, feeling for the subtle shifts beneath the surface. Minutes passed, an eternity suspended, before a soft, reluctant click echoed through the room. Inside, wrapped in oilskin, rested a leather-bound journal, its cover embossed with her father's unyielding hand. She exhaled sharply, the air thick with anticipation and unease. The book's spine creaked as she opened it, revealing pages dense with looping handwriting, symbols interlaced with diagrams that shimmered faintly under the waning light. But this was no ordinary journal. The text twisted and turned in strange cipher, a language that blended ancient script with her father's personal code, layered with obfuscations that suggested he trusted no one but himself. Alara's fingers trembled as she flipped through, eyes darting between the cryptic entries. One page held a hastily sketched map, the city's streets redrawn with curious notations. Another showed a detailed drawing of the southern lantern, the very one faltering now, with annotations about its core, a mechanism hidden beneath centuries of tradition. There were warnings here, too, words crossed out and rewritten, phrases like, "The abyss stirs beneath," and "They watch through light's veil." Alara's pulse quickened. The threads she had been chasing suddenly wove together in her hands. Her father had been unraveling the same puzzle, inching painfully close to a truth that others buried deep beneath layers of secrecy. A sudden creak from the looming shelves made her freeze. The workshop's shadows seemed to deepen, swallowing the corners of the room. She looked up sharply, heart pounding, not with fear, but with the unshakable knowledge that she was no longer alone. The faintest whisper of movement brushed against the dark, too subtle to place, but unmistakable. The journal trembled beneath her fingers. As if sensing the danger, Alara slipped it into her satchel and moved swiftly to the far wall, where a panel slightly misaligned distorted the grain of the wood. Her hands found the seam and pulled. The panel slid open, revealing a hollow cavity recessed into the wall. Within the hidden space lay a small crystalline vial, filled with shimmering liquid that glowed faintly like bottled starlight. Alara's breath caught. It was an essence of pure light, something her father had kept secret, perhaps a key to the lantern's failing glow. A cold dread pressed against her mind, thick and unyielding. She closed the cavity, sealing the workshop's secrets once more, and turned to leave. As she stepped outside, the city's twilight wrapped around her like a shroud. A dismal fog crept between the stones, snaking toward the alleys and weaving a chilling silence through the nerves of the street. From the shadows, unseen eyes followed her retreat, relentless watchers bound to protect the darkness with teeth and shadows. Alara's jaw clenched. The lanterns were failing, the abyss was rising, and the truth her father had fought to uncover was closer than ever, to expose or to bury forever. She tightened her grip on the journal, the weight of the shattered relic heavy in her hands. The path ahead was perilous, but it was hers to walk, illuminated only by the flickering hope of defiance. The fog wove through the narrow streets like some spectral serpent, curling and twisting its way past tarnished iron lanterns that flickered weakly against the creeping dusk. Alara moved with cautious resolve, the journal pressed close against her chest, its leather worn and cracked under her fingers. Every so often, her eyes darted sideways, catching on shadows that refused to settle, figures lurking just beyond the veil of mist. The lower tiers of Lismere were a labyrinth of crumbling stone and leaning timber, where the city's forgotten whispered in half-forgotten dialects, and the air tasted faintly of salt and rot. The distant clamor of market cries from the upper city was swallowed here, leaving an unsettling quiet broken only by the soft slap of Alara's boots against cold cobbles. She knew she was being watched. The feeling clung to her like a second skin, unnerving and unyielding. A glance over her shoulder revealed nothing but the gray hug of fog and the shifting shadows between alley walls. Still, the hairs along the nape of her neck prickled with awareness. Someone, or something, moved just out of sight, following her steps with chilling patience. Her breath caught in a sudden cloud of mist as a faint scraping sound echoed off the stone behind her. Alara froze, heart hammering. She swallowed down the rising panic and pressed herself against the wall of a narrow passage, her hand instinctively tightening around the satchel strap. The journal contained more than words. It bore the weight of secrets that could threaten the fragile balance holding Lismere together. From the dim portal at the edge of the lane, a pair of eyes gleamed briefly, cold, calculating. Then the vision was gone, swallowed by shadow once more. Alara did not dare follow. Instead, she spun lightly on her heel and slipped into a web of twisting alleys that spread beneath the thrum of the city above. The fog thickened, clinging to her cloak, clammy and dense. It flared the edges of her vision, turning the familiar into the strange, and the strange into peril. Unease scraped at the edges of her courage, but she forced each step forward, the journal a beacon against the encroaching darkness. The distant clink of chains rattling somewhere deep in the undercity made her flinch, but she refused to succumb to superstition. Yet somewhere in the folds of the mist, footsteps paced out a rhythm just behind hers, never close enough to catch, always lurking. The game was dangerous, but Alara was no stranger to risk. At the heart of the lower tiers, near the ancient canal that split the city's underbelly, the lantern light waned to a pale ember. Here the shadows throbbed with an unnatural stillness, absence pressing heavier than presence. Alara's pulse quickened as she ducked beneath sagging wooden eaves, peering around mud-spattered crates stacked against crumbling brick. A cold voice whispered through the chill, no more than a breath against her ear. Alara. The single word carried the weight of a threat sharpened by the abyss itself. She spun, but found only darkness wrapped in silence, the fog swirling where the voice had been. Steeling herself, she whispered back, "Show yourself, if you want me to listen." The reply was a soft, bitter laugh, fracturing like shattered glass drifting away on the wind. Curiosity is a reckless flame, girl. You'll burn if you chase it too far. Unease tightened its grip. The voice was familiar, yet twisted, like a memory warped in shadow. Alara's fingers brushed the vial hidden in her satchel, feeling its faint heartbeat of light. Whatever waited in these depths, it feared that lantern's secret. A sudden movement, a flash of dark cloth folding into the mist, sent her spinning after it. Her boots splashed in a shallow pool near the canal's edge, water lapping cold against stone. She caught a glimpse of a figure's cloak disappearing down a rickety ladder leading beneath the city, the planks groaning ominously under each hurried step. Without hesitation, Alara followed, descending into the undercity's belly where the fog became a heavier breath and the walls oozed damp despair. The faint glimmer of phosphorescent moss clung to damp stone, casting eerie green hues that daunted but did not deter her. The figure paused at a crossroads beneath the city, silhouetted by the sickly glow of a flickering lantern dangling from a rusted chain. Alara crouched behind a broken pillar, peering through the swirling mist. The shadowy shape adjusted a hood, revealing the glint of eyes that never seemed to blink, locked on some silent threat beyond her. Time stretched between them, taut and fragile as spider's silk. Alara's mind raced, not with fear, but with the urgency of purpose. This was no random predator, but a sentinel of secrets, one who had been trailing her since the lantern's light began to dim. A sudden rush of movement shattered the stillness. The figure turned, darting down a narrow tunnel that smelled of decay and old embers. Heart pounding, Alara gave chase, the journal so firmly clasped that she feared for its fragile spine. The tunnel twisted, narrowing to a suffocating crawl between ancient stone. The distant echo of dripping water marked their progress, a staccato chant in the silent abyss. She pushed on, lungs burning, the sense of being hunted now conflated with a growing determination not to be lost, as her father had been. Abruptly, the corridor opened into a cavernous hollow beneath the city. The walls glowed faintly with veins of crystalline light, but here the fog hung thickest, dense as smoke. The figure was nowhere to be seen, vanished like a ghost into the mist. Ilara stepped forward cautiously, the stillness pressing on her ribs. Then, from the shadows, a soft cascade of whispered voices rose, fractured and overlapping, secrets entwined in riddles not meant for ears like hers. Her fingers closed over the journal's cover. Somewhere in those murmurs lay the key, and whoever had come to trail her knew this darkness well. They had called her by name, and they had warned her. The fog shifted, and for a heartbeat she thought she saw two glinting eyes stare back from the gloom. Ilara swallowed hard, feeling the weight of every step she had taken down this dangerous spiral. The night beyond the fog was darker than any shadow, but the truth, buried in whispers and light, was beginning to pulse beneath her hand, and the watchers were waiting, patient and relentless, in the silence beyond the lantern's flicker. The faint glimmer of the crystalline veins barely cut through the heavy fog curling around Ilara's ankles. She tightened her grip on the journal, heart hammering so loud it sounded like a drumbeat in the hollow chamber. Somewhere in this claustrophobic hollow, footsteps echoed, a slow, deliberate tread that did not match the frantic chase moments before. Her breath hitched. The figure was back, and this time there was no escape. From the shroud of mist, a hand shot out and grabbed her wrist with a grip rough as cracked leather. Ilara twisted, struggling against the grasp, the cold iron of a blade pressing against her throat just enough to remind her of the stakes. "Not so fast, Ilara," a low voice rasped, voice thick with resentment and warning. She froze. The voice belonged to a man, middle-aged, his breath heavy with the stench of old ale and regret. The man's eyes, sharp but shadowed with disappointment, held a flicker of something familiar, as if he had seen too many betrayals to fully trust anyone anymore. "Who are you?" Ilara demanded, voice shaking, though not with fear. "A friend," he said, though his tone betrayed little warmth, or what's left of one. He released her wrist slowly, stepping back enough to give her space, though not enough to let her slip away. Ilara scrutinized him, searching for any trace of an enemy masquerading as a savior. The tattered gray cloak he wore was marked with faint insignia she recognized, one worn by the city guard, though the emblem was tarnished and partly erased, a ghost of authority long gone. The man's name surfaced then, whispered in hushed circles when her father was still alive. Kale. A guard dismissed after accusations of conspiracy and treason, a disgraced outcast. "You knew my father," Ilara bit out, suspicion and hope weaving through her words. "If you knew him, then you know why I'm here." Kale's gaze flickered downward, shame and sorrow mixing in his tight jaw. "Aye, your father saw the cracks beneath the council's polished stone. He whispered of shadows deeper than the abyss itself, but the council silenced him. Quietly, permanently." He drew a bitter laugh, a sound cracked and raw. "And they tried to silence me after him." Ilara's fingers tightened on the journal, a surge of desperate questions flooding her mind. "Why didn't you come to me? Or to him?" Kale's eyes darkened, scanning the fog, wary even here in this forgotten chamber. "Because they watched, always watched. The council's grip stretches farther than any of us dared imagine." His voice lowered to a grim murmur. "They send eyes and ears to root out dissenters and traitors. Your father was clever, a flame flickering against a gale, but they snuffed him out before he could speak the truth aloud. And when I tried to raise my voice after, they took everything from me." A flicker of rage burned in Ilara's chest. "Then help me. You know the council's methods, their spies, their lies. I can't do this alone." Kale stepped closer, eyes resolute beneath thick brows. "You can't trust your own shadow in this city, Ilara. Not anymore. But you, and only you, might have a chance to break their hold." He slid a scarred hand into the folds of his cloak and pulled out a small vial filled with a shimmering silver liquid. "This will help you see through their tricks. It lets you watch the Watchers, if only for a few moments." Ilara's gaze dropped to the vial, a fragile hope sparking like embers against cold stone. "How do I know you're not leading me into another trap?" A grim smile cracked Kale's lips, Because I owe your father more than I could ever repay. His eyes locked onto hers, steady and unflinching. I will not let him vanish without a fight. The murmur of whispered voices simmered back into the chamber, threading through the fog like a lure. Alara glanced toward the shadows, sensing eyes lurking just beyond the pale light, waiting to pounce the moment she faltered. The knowledge that this place was no longer just a cavern, but a battleground of shadows pulled tight the sinews of her resolve. We move fast, Kale warned, voice low and urgent. The council's reach is tightening. They've begun tampering with the lanterns. Your father's warnings made them desperate. If they extinguish the lights completely, the abyss will swallow Lismere whole. Alara swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling like a stone in her gut. She folded the vial carefully into her sleeve and closed the journal, determination blazing anew. Whatever secrets lay buried in the shadows, beneath the city, beneath the lies, she would uncover them. Together, two figures slipped back into the mist, footsteps swallowed by the hollow's breathless silence. Behind them, the watchers faded into the gloom, their patience eternal, their vigilance unbroken, waiting for the lantern's light to flicker and fail. Alara and Kale crouched side by side in the hollowed ruins beneath Lismere, the brittle edges of flickering lantern light casting long, quivering shadows against the ancient stone. The journal lay open between them, its once gleaming leather cover now cracked and worn, pages yellowed by time and secrets. They had been poring over it for what felt like hours, tracing the elegant but cryptic script with fingers trembling both from cold and a swelling hope. Kale leaned closer, breath forming a thin mist in the chill air. The cipher is layered, like the city itself. The first stage isn't just scrambled letters, it's a riddle within the handwriting, and a pattern of symbols masked as decoration. His voice was low, urgent, as if the stones themselves might soon eavesdrop. Look here, he whispered, pointing to a series of jagged marks curling in the margin. These aren't mere flourishes, they echo the architecture of Lismere's foundations. Alara's heart thudded unevenly as she studied the symbols. Something in that jagged script stirred a distant memory. Her father's voice, warning her that the city's true history was buried below, beneath layers of stone and silence. She traced the shapes delicately, eyes narrowing as the blurred lines began to resolve into meaning. A map, she breathed, but no ordinary one. This points to a hidden chamber, beneath the oldest quarter, beneath the Hollowreach itself. Kale nodded, a faint spark lighting in his gaze. Exactly. The notes suggest a lantern, older than the ceremony, forged before the council took control, forgotten and forsaken. If it exists, it would be a light untouched by sabotage, a beacon from a purer time. The air seemed to grow heavier around them, thick with untold history and imminent danger. Their fingers moved in tandem as they worked to decipher the next layers. Each symbol peeled back another fragment of the cryptic puzzle, directions inscribed in metaphors rooted in the city's earliest myths, references to the weeping stone and the veil of ashes. Alara's pulse quickened. These landmarks were buried beneath ruins now swallowed by moss and shadow. The flickering lantern light trembled, casting erratic shapes that twisted the carved walls into twisted figures, a silent gallery of watchers, frozen mid-gesture in the dim gloom. Alara glanced over her shoulder, the memory of unseen eyes lurking in the chamber still sharp. They were not alone here. The city's ghosts or something far more tangible awaited. Kale, she whispered, voice taut with urgency. This isn't just a discovery. This is a warning. My father must have known about this lantern. He wrote in here about it. And if the council has gone to lengths to erase it from memory, they fear what it could mean. Kale's mouth tightened into a grim line. Which means they won't stop hunting us. But if we can find it, the lantern might be the key to holding back the abyss. The whispers of wind through fractured stone carried an almost mournful tune, the forgotten voices of those who had built the city for a purpose now lost to time and greed. Alara's fingertips hovered over a carefully sketched diagram, a cross-hatched pattern that resembled the underground tunnels she had glimpsed in old blueprints stored in her father's study. We have to go deeper, she said, eyes blazing with fierce resolve. Further than any living soul has dared to tread. Kale glanced around. tension coiling in his frame. This journey will be perilous. The foundations haven't been walked for centuries, if at all. Traps, decay, creatures of shadow, the abyss corrupts even stone. The journal's cipher began to yield its final clue, a phrase written in archaic glyphs, a beacon hidden in plain sight. Beneath the sorrow, the lantern's heart beats still. Alara whispered the words over and over, each syllable a drumbeat in the darkness that pressed close. The sorrow, the heart. It all pointed to a place beneath the old weeping willow tree in the city square, whose twisted branches had long been a symbol of mourning. With the cipher cracked, the map began to form not just on parchment, but in their minds, a route that twisted down through abandoned wards of Lismir's underbelly, into vaults sealed by time and fear. The realization that this ancient lantern might be their last hope shimmered like a fragile lifeline in the gloom. Kale reached out, his hand steady on her shoulder. Whatever we find, whatever waits beneath, we face it together. For your father, for Lismir. Alara nodded, the weight of the past and the promise of light binding her breath and will. The ruins around them seemed to lean in closer, the silence stretching tight before the first step into deeper darkness. Behind the veil of stone and shadow, the city held its breath, waiting. The air grew colder the deeper they descended, a viscous chill that seeped into Alara's bones and set her breath to steaming in the lantern's faint glow. Each step echoed hollowly against the crumbling stone, the sound swallowed quickly by the thick silence that seemed woven into the walls themselves. The faint trickle of water somewhere far below whispered of forgotten streams running through veins of the city long forsaken. Alara's fingers brushed the rough surface of the ancient tunnel's walls, feeling the brittle cracks and the faint etchings of symbols half erased by time. The glyphs were unfamiliar but felt alive, as though watching her passage with unseen eyes. Somewhere beneath the dirt and age-old dust, the lantern's heart pulsed faintly, an urgency humming just beyond perception. Kale's steady presence was a shadow at her side, his breathing low and measured. He moved with practiced caution, eyes sharp for any sign of peril. The air stagnates deeper down, he murmured, voice hushed. We should keep moving. Lingering invites the abyss's whispers. Alara swallowed the knot of fear tightening her throat. She had dreamed of this moment whispered in the margins of her father's journals, but the reality was harsher. Every sound amplified, every darkness a potential predator camped between the cracks. Their footsteps led them past rusted iron gates hanging askew, through corridors choked with rubble and tangled roots that clawed through the stone like grasping hands. Mottled fungi glowed faintly along the ceilings, casting sickly pale halos that barely flinched against the press of shadow closing in. Somewhere deeper, the distant drip-drip of water was steady and deliberate, as if counting down. Alara paused beneath an archway carved with faded reliefs, figures of long-lost ancestors frozen in eternal lament. Their faces were gaunt, eyes hollow but somehow accusing. She traced the worn carvings with a reverence born of necessity. They built these paths to protect something, she murmured, or to bury it away from prying eyes. Kale's gaze fixed on a faint rustle ahead. Movement. His hand went to the hilt of his blade, the whisper of steel a sudden sharp note amid silence. A pair of glowing eyes blinked from the shadows, too low to be human. Something small and agile slipped back into the dark as quickly as it appeared, carrying with it a scent of damp earth and cold breath. A shiver ran down Alara's spine. The abyss might not exist only outside. It filled the marrow of these tunnels, corrupting life itself. The pathway split, a branching fork that diverged into labyrinthine tunnels, the map in her memory flickering uncertainly. Alara crouched to consult a weathered marking in the stone floor. Half a rune, half an arrow carved deep enough to resist centuries of wear. This way, she said, voice steeling itself, towards the lower vaults. They pressed forward, careful not to disturb the brittle bones and shattered remnants of those who had gone before. The dead lingered here in whispers, forgotten pioneers swallowed by the darkness they sought to harness or escape. The air thickened with a heavy scent, wet stone, decay, and something metallic and sharp beneath it all. Alara's heart stuttered when she caught the glint of something unnatural half buried in the dirt. A fragment of glass, cracked and etched with arcane symbols, an echo of the sabotage that plagued the lanterns above. Cale knelt beside it, brushing away the grime. "This wasn't left by time," he said. "Someone came here recently, or left a mark for us, or a trap." A shudder passed between them. The city was not just a graveyard, but a battleground where unseen forces still wove their tangled webs. They moved on carefully, the passage sloping steeper now, spiraling downward like a serpent into the city's cold, lonely heart. The walls seemed to close in, and the shadows pooled thicker, swallowing the flickering light so quickly it was as if the darkness itself was hungry. Alara reached for the ancient lantern cradled in her pack, a relic from her father, pulsing faintly with a tethered radiance. Its glow was a fragile promise against the suffocating void, but here, even its light felt swallowed whole. The silence broke suddenly with a distant rumble, stones shifting or falling somewhere deep below. The earth itself groaned as if protesting their intrusion. Cale's eyes met hers, unflinching. "The abyss stirs," he said plainly. "We cannot lose our way." She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. There was no turning back now. Beneath the city, where sorrow and secrets seeped into the stone, the true test awaited. With gathering resolve, Alara stepped forward into the deepest darkness, the descent beginning in earnest. Each step a heartbeat closer to the lantern's hidden core, and to the truth that might yet save Lismere from the rising abyss. Water trickled in soft, unseen streams from fractured arches above, the sound barely louder than a whisper against the walls of the ancient hall. Alara's boots splashed cautiously through the shallow pools, pooling unevenly across the crumbled floor. The faint glow from her father's lantern stretched long shadows, making the broken columns and decrepit shelves appear to hunch like drowned beasts in the flickering light. The air hung heavy and cool, thick with the scent of mildew and salt, a stark contrast to the dry dust of the upper city vaults. Somewhere beneath, the ocean pressed close, its endless surge having claimed this place long ago. The sunken archives, once a repository for Lismere's oldest knowledge, now lay half swallowed by water and silence. "We must be close," Cale muttered, voice low and steady. His fingers brushed a ruined scroll sealed beneath layers of moss, fragments of ink blurred and run like tears. The records Alara's been searching for, if they survived at all. Alara's pulse quickened. Her fingers hovered over a basin filled with stagnant water, the surface broken by a lone page bobbing like a wounded leaf. She leaned over carefully, catching it before the current could drag it deeper into darkness. The paper was brittle, soaked in salt and shadow, but something swirled faintly under the lantern's light, letters forming strange sigils she did not recognize. "We're not just looking for history," she said softly. "We're looking for the truth buried beneath the lies of the ritual they perform above." Cale's gaze flicked upward where narrow beams of dim light traced the ceiling's cracked vaults. "The original ritual, the one your father uncovered. If what you suspect is true, it changes everything." The shelves stretched into the gloom like broken ribs, some toppled and spilling their necrotic contents into shallow pools. Books had swollen and disintegrated, parchments curled and stained. The salt water had obliterated much, but parts remained stubbornly preserved under layers of mud and muck. Alara crouched beside a shattered lectern, where a heavy tome lay half submerged, its iron-bound cover etched with an emblem she knew well, the old glyph of the lantern's founding house, but twisted, smudged, and crossed out. She opened the volume gingerly, the pages crackling as they gave way to long-forgotten ink. The script darkened, yet still readable with care. "The rituals above," she whispered, "are a shadow of the original, corrupted by whoever rewrote the texts." Cale's brows drew together. "The way the light now dims, if the magic's altered, it would explain why the lanterns are dying." Pressure built in Alara's chest. This was the edge of a cascading revelation. They delved deeper into the archives, moving slowly, mindful of the ancient floor's treacherous rot beneath the water's surface. Each step echoed against the stone, an oppressive counterpoint to the dripping silence. "In these documents," Alara murmured, tracing finger over a fragment of parchment sealed in glass, There are instructions for a ritual that calls on balance between the lantern light and the abyss. Not domination or suppression, but harmony. The current method, it's aggressive, forced. No wonder it fractures. Kale knelt to peer through the dark water. We're standing on a rift. The lanterns aren't failing because they're tired. They're resisting. The abyss creeps in when the magic is strained. Alara's father's lantern pulsed faintly, a fragile flicker swallowed by the gloom. She felt its faint warmth against her palm and wondered how long it could hold against this gathering void. A sudden shift beneath the water made her start. Something brushed past her ankle, a silvery flash of movement, gone the moment she turned. Her breath hitched. The archives were not as empty as they seemed. "We're not alone," she whispered. Kale's hand found hers, steadying. "Keep your light close." His voice was sharp as the cold that seeped into her bones. They pressed forward along a narrow corridor, the water rising just above their knees. Walls here were scoured smooth, ancient glyphs running in bands overhead, forgotten verses of power and warning. Alara tried to read them, but they twisted in her mind like riddles half remembered. At the end of the hall lay a submerged vault sealed by a rusted iron gate, half collapsed into the water, barred with chains too heavy to lift without tools. Alara's fingers tingled as she reached toward the latch, hesitant but compelled. Behind the gate, she glimpsed stacks of ledgers and codices, an ocean of forbidden knowledge trapped beneath water and time. "We need to get inside," she said quietly, "before the truth drowns completely." Kale produced a worn pry bar from his pack, and with effort, the gate groaned open. Dark water spilled through the gap, a cold flood hungrily swallowing the steps beyond. Together, they slipped inside the vault, the lantern's light cast long and wavering. The ledgers were splayed across submerged desks, their pages mottled with mold and algae, yet a few remained shockingly intact, their ink stubborn and vivid. Alara pulled open one, heart pounding as words leapt out, a record of the earliest rituals, performed with reverence and respect, invoking spirits and light as partners, not weapons. "This is it," she breathed. "The original magic, the truth of the lantern's power." Kale scanned the margins, his gaze sharp, and the notes of those who tried to change it, warnings, accusations, corruption, heresy. They tried to bury this knowledge for a reason. A chill gripped her as realization settled like a stone. The conspirators had rewritten the ritual to tighten their control, to blind the city to the abyss's real threat. Her father had found this, and now, so had they. Outside, the distant rumble of shifting stone trembled through the depths, a reminder that time was running out, and the darkness was rising ever closer. Alara closed the ledger with trembling hands, resolve hardening like forged steel. The sunken archives had given them a glimpse beneath the surface, but the truth lay waiting to be unearthed, even if it meant drowning in the lies that suffocated Lismere. The air shifted suddenly, a whisper almost drowned beneath the steady drip of water and the distant echo of stone grinding against stone. Alara's breath hitched, the damp chill pressing into her skin as she scanned the cramped vault. Shadows stretched like fingers around the ledgers and submerged desks, the lantern's weak glow trembling with every ripple of the water. "We're not alone," Kale said in a low hiss, eyes sharp in the murk. Alara's pulse thundered in her ears. The archives were supposed to be empty this late in the day, a forgotten place where secrets slowly rotted. But now, a different sound seeped beneath the water. Heavy footsteps, stifled commands, the unmistakable clatter of metal. "They found us," she whispered. The rusted gate groaned behind her, though they had barred it as best they could. From the darkness, 3 figures emerged, their armor catching faint light in unsettling glints. Council enforcers, faces masked by iron visors, their hands curled tight around crossbows, eyes scanning the flooded floors methodically. Alara's mind scrambled for escape, but the water lapped at her knees, cold and unyielding. The narrow vault walls hemmed them in like a prison. Kale moved first, gripping his dagger, stepping protectively in front of her. "Back the way you came," he muttered, voice grim, "or this ends badly." One of the enforcers barked an order, and suddenly bolts flew, arcing sharp and deadly through the dim air. the water rippled violently as Alara dove beneath a splash, sharp pain igniting in her arm where a bolt grazed her sleeve. The lantern wavered, casting grotesque shadows on the crumbling stone. Kay or no safety here. The fight was on. She surfaced, gasping, propelled by a surge of desperate need. Kale was already lunging toward one of the guards, blades flashing. The water accepted the violence, the slash of steel, the splash of bodies, cold and unsympathetic. Alara fumbled with a ledger, the soaked parchment crumbling in her hands, despair threading through her determination. "We have to hold them off," she began, but a heavy boot slammed into her ankle, dragging her under briefly. She kicked hard, breaking free, heart slamming. Behind her, the noise grew. The enforcers were coordinated, unyielding. One nearly caught Kale in a brutal grapple, but with a desperate twist, Kale threw him off, sending the man sprawling into the water with a splash that echoed like a gunshot. Alara scrambled to her feet, water up to her waist now. The cold burned, sapping strength, but she forced herself forward, clutching the lantern tightly. A narrow ledge along the wall gave her a chance. She ducked low, breath hissing through clenched teeth as an arrow thudded into the wood mere inches from her. "Split up!" one enforcer shouted, his voice like grinding stone. Alara's gaze landed on a narrow passageway behind a tipped desk, barely visible beneath the waterline. It might lead back toward the main archives, or deeper into death. There was no choice. "Kale!" she hissed. "The passage!" He was already retreating, blocking another guard's advance with a dagger pressed under an exposed helmet joint. They converged at the passage's mouth, squeezing through the gap. The water closed over her head as Alara ducked beneath the low stone arch, panic rising like the abyss itself. Her lungs burned, but the cold clarity sharpened her senses. The distant sounds of struggle faded dimly, replaced by the echo of dripping water and her own ragged breaths. She broke the surface on the other side, soaked and trembling, the metallic tang of blood in the water between her fingers. "We're not clear," Kale warned, voice tight. "They'll be after us before long." Alara's eyes darted through the labyrinthine vaults, flooded tunnels twisting like veins beneath the city. Shelves of ancient tomes loomed, half ruined by water and time. Somewhere within this drowned maze lay the answers, but also the traps, the watchers. A sudden clang echoed as footsteps thundered behind them. Alara spun, raising the lantern, casting a frantic light. Two enforcers appeared like specters, eyes blazing beneath their helmets. "Hold them!" Kale shouted, slashing sideways, forcing one back into a broken shelf. Alara grabbed up a fallen metal rod, its rusted edge jagged and unforgiving. She met the charging enforcer head-on, steel biting through water and muscle. The man staggered, surprise shattering his mask of certainty. A second bolt hissed through the flooded chamber, a warning, meant to kill. But Kale deflected it with a clatter of steel. The dance of violence ebbed and flowed. Desperate strikes, splashes, groans swallowed by water. Then, through the chaos, Alara glimpsed a flicker by the far wall. A slim figure slipping unseen past the melee, clutching a small satchel. Her heart leapt. Knowledge, perhaps stolen just moments too late. "We can't let them escape!" she shouted, kicking forward. Kale nodded grimly. They moved in unison, each stroke driven by the sinking light of hope. The vault groaned again, deeper and more insistent, as if the city itself warned them. Time was bleeding away. The enforcers faltered, uncertainty flickering like candlelight. Alara saw her chance. With a surge, she lunged toward the shadow, weaving through turbulent water, arms stretched out. The figure twisted, a flash of recognition. A hood fell back to reveal a young woman's face, sharp and haunted. "Elena?" Alara gasped. The woman's eyes burned with sorrow and fury. "I warned you to stop," she whispered, voice rasped with exhaustion. "They're already here." Before Alara could respond, a heavy hand slammed into the side of her head, darkness blossoming like ink beneath the lantern's wavering glow. A cold grip seized her ankle, dragging her down into the abyss of stone and water, and into the gnawing shadow of deeper betrayal. Alara tasted the metallic tang of blood as the cold fist of unconsciousness clawed at her, pulling her beneath the surface. Water swallowed the world whole, a suffocating silence pressing against her ears. Panic flared where hope once burned, but a surge of will forced her eyes open. Feebly, she kicked, instinct tearing her from the grip ensnaring her ankle. She broke free, gasping for air long since lost. Dim shapes wavered before her, flickering lanterns casting pale halos through the murk. Kale was there, his face a storm of urgency and pain, dragged backward by an enforcer's iron grasp. Alara's limbs burned, but she propelled herself toward him, unyielding. She grabbed his arm, and together they broke through the watery swarm, stumbling into a cavernous chamber where the water thinned enough to steal ragged breaths. The groan of the vault echoed again, a deep tremble that vibrated in their bones. Somewhere behind, the enforcers roared, fury swelling beneath their masks. "We don't have time," Kale gasped. "The tunnels, they lead deeper to the old abyss passage. If we stay here, they'll—" "We must move now," Alara finished, eyes scanning the damp walls for an escape. Her fingers traced the carved stones until they found a narrow seam, a door long submerged, sealed beneath cold roots and ages of silt. She pushed with desperate might, the surface giving way with a shriek that rent the heavy silence. A choked air pocket hissed out, collapsing into the dark expanse beyond. Kale and Alara exchanged no words. None were needed. They dove as one into the black mouth of the passage. Cold swallowed them, thicker than water, as they sank deeper into the hollow vein of the city's underbelly. Alara's lantern flickered wildly, its fragile light struggling against the oppressive dark. Strange, ancient glyphs traced the tunnel walls, pulsing faintly as if breathing with a life of their own. Something low and distant thrummed through the stones, an unnatural vibration that set Alara's teeth on edge. The abyss was near. "We're close," Kale whispered, voice distorted by the water and fear. "This passage leads under the city, beneath even the southern lantern's core." Alara clenched her teeth, fighting the chill that spread through her limbs. The waters grew colder, the pressure intensifying, making every breath a battle. The path narrowed, forcing them to angle downward, the descent steep and unyielding. Suddenly, a shimmer flickered ahead, a tearing fissure in the stone, revealing a cascading rush of ink-black water pouring from a chasm beyond. "It's the abyss itself," Alara murmured, heart pounding like a war drum. "We're close enough to touch it." Kale grabbed her arm as a sudden surge shook the passage, stones rattling loose above them. They were caught in the tremor, clawing at holdfasts, gasping as the tunnel threatened collapse. The abyssal currents pulled at them fiercely, as if eager to claim interlopers. Alara's lantern flickered, the light sinking towards death, but her grip on it never wavered. They swam with frantic strokes, dodging debris and unseen claws, fighting the surge that threatened to drag them into the eternal darkness. Breath blurred and pain blurred. Then through the haze a cavern opened, vast and hollow, where stillness returned like a fragile promise. Here a strange calm lingered, a void that swallowed sound and light alike. Alara's chest heaved as she grasped a stone ledge, water lapping at her chin. Kale followed, both of them coughing, shivering, barely alive. "This place," Alara whispered, her voice hoarse. "It's older than the city above." Her hand brushed against something cold and smooth embedded in the wall, a relic etched with runes unlike any she recognized. The lantern's light shimmered, revealing twisted faces and shattered wings carved deep into the stone. "It's a warning," Kale said, voice trembling. "They wanted no one to come here." Alara's gaze narrowed, the weight of revelation pressing on her like stones on her chest. The forgotten truths of Hollowreach throbbed in the shadows, betrayals layered like sediment, buried beneath centuries of silence. A harsh rasp echoed somewhere beyond, breaking the fragile quiet. Alara and Kale froze, eyes straining against the dark. The sound swelled, a whisper, then a growl, something ancient stirring in the deep. "Move," Kale hissed, yanking her away from the wall. They splashed back into the swirling current, retreating along the submerged tunnels that twisted into black infinity. Behind them, the abyssal tremors grew louder, the city's last defenses crumbling. Above, the failing lanterns could not hold. Below, the dark was spreading, patient and endless. Alara's heart was a wild hammer in the dark. She would not let the abyss claim her city, not while breath and light remained. But the path ahead was no comfort. Deeper still they must go, into the maw of Hollowreach's deepest secrets, and the shadows that waited hungry there. Alara's lungs burned as she pushed forward, the water around her thickening with an unnatural chill. The narrow tunnel opened suddenly, widening into an enormous cavern that yawned beneath the city like a buried wound. Pale light flickered across the walls, not from any lantern, but from the flora itself, strange and alien in its glow. The subterranean jungle stretched out before them, vast and silent. Vines braided with translucent leaves shimmered softly, pulsing with a faint bluish bioluminescence beneath their touch. Strange flowers bloomed in clusters, their petals thin as dragonfly wings but impossibly vibrant, casting eerie shadows on the slick, rocky floor. Hale exhaled sharply, water washing from his lips. I've never seen anything like this. Is it alive? Alara's eyes traced the twisting branches arching overhead, hanging like pale tapestries heavy with dew. It must be, she whispered, voice hushed, but not like any plant we know. There's something wrong here. The air thickened, charged with a faint pulse, a tremor beneath the lantern's glow. The light danced erratically, as if reacting to the energy that hummed beneath the earth. The flora swayed in a current they could not feel, their bioluminescent glow flickering in quiet rhythm. It was as if the cavern itself breathed, slow, deep, and eternal. You feel that? Hale's hand brushed against an iris-shaped bloom. The petals split like a delicate fan, revealing a dark core pulsing with amber radiance. This is not just light, it's power. Alara drew closer, reaching out to touch the strange blossom. The moment her fingers grazed it, a shiver ran through her skin, like an echo of cold fire. Beneath the surface of the flower's petals, faint veins of night black writhed. Shadows coiled beneath translucent flesh. The abyss, she breathed, understanding dawning. These plants feed on it. A distant rumble echoed through the chamber, low and unbroken, as if the earth itself groaned in mourning. The shadows stirring beneath the foliage shifted, alive with slow, deliberate motion. Alara and Kale froze, eyes scanning the gloom for movement. Roots, thick and gnarled, crept along the cave floor, their tendrils curling like serpents around ancient stones. They seemed to pulse in tandem with the failing lanterns above, a resonance that stretched across the thin boundary holding back the dark. This, Alara swallowed hard. This place is part of the abyss. It's a living conduit. Hale knelt beside a clump of coarse moss that shimmered with the same pale glow. If it's feeding on abyssal energy, then this is the source of the spread. Whatever is poisoning the lanterns must be tied to this place. The deeper they ventured, the more the flora stretched, climbing walls, wrapping columns of petrified wood that lay half buried in the earth. Some blooms hung heavy and heavy with dew that gleamed like liquid starlight, while others opened and closed in slow, rhythmic beats, as if breathing. The air grew thick with the scent of decay and something metallic, sharp beneath the sweetness. Alara's gaze landed on a tangle of vines knotted like a noose around a broken piece of rusted metal, the twisted remnants of an ancient lantern, broken and blackened. Its light had long since faded, extinguished by the corrosive touch of the abyss. Look, Kale pointed to a cluster of runes carved deep into the rock, half hidden beneath creeping growth. Their edges glowed faintly, matching the pulsing rhythm of the floor. They are wards, Alara murmured, tracing a finger carefully over the symbols. Old magic designed to keep this place sealed. Her breath caught, but they're failing. A cold dread settled in her bones. The abyss clawed upward through the earth, dragging with it this parasitic life, twisting the very foundation of Hollowreach beneath their feet. Each flicker of the lantern's light above was a desperate struggle against encroaching dark, and down here, the struggle was lost to time. Suddenly, a flicker, a movement on the edge of her vision, made Alara whirl around. Pale tendrils slithered silently from the undergrowth, coiling like hungry fingers. They hung in the darkness between the bioluminescent trees, waiting. Kale tensed, hand on the hilt of his blade. We're not alone. Nearly invisible shapes moved just beneath the faint glow, creatures warped by abyssal energy, twisted plants that blurred the line between flora and beast. Eyes glimmered in shadowed hollows, reflecting the soft light with unnatural hunger. We need to be very careful, Alara said, voice low and steady. Every instinct screamed that this was no mere garden. It was a trap, prison, and a warning all at once. As they moved deeper, the glow intensified. Pools of liquid light gathered in natural basins, their surfaces rippling with black currents that seemed to swallow the faintest spark. It was impossible to tell where plant ended and dark began, the abyss bleeding outward through every leaf and root. I don't think this place was meant to be found, Kale said quietly. Not by the living. Alara's fingers gripped the ancient lantern hung at her belt. Its light pulsed in response to the cavern's rhythms, steady but strained. It was a fragile last defense, but the truth here was undeniable. The abyss was no distant threat. It had taken root, living and spreading beneath the very heart of their city. A mournful sigh echoed through the cavern, part wind, part breath, part something far older. Alara felt it wrap around her, pulling at her resolve. "We have to stop this," she said, voice fierce against the silence. Before Hollowreach dies under the weight of shadow. The abyssal flora pulsed again, a slow crescendo of light and darkness, as if the cavern responded. Somewhere in the sprawling depths ahead, a secret waited, and the price of uncovering it was yet to be revealed. The cavern hummed with a quiet menace, the soft pulse of Alara's lantern mingling with the bioluminescent glow that painted the jagged walls in eerie blues and greens. Each step they took echoed faintly, swallowed quickly by the breathless dark that clung to every crevice. Moss and thorny tendrils brushed against their boots, and strange phosphorescent spores floated lazily in the still air, disturbed only by their presence. Kale's eyes darted ahead, sharp and wary. "Look there." He knelt beside a shattered stone slab buried beneath a tangle of glowing vines. Alara crouched beside him. Her fingers traced the rough surface. Embedded in the dirt nearby was a haphazardly dropped tool, a rusted chisel, its handle worn smooth. The metal still bore faint scratches, lines that seemed almost deliberate, like the frantic signature of someone who had left it behind in a rush. "Father's mark," she whispered, heart thudding. It was the same kind of tool her father had favored in his work, meticulous and precise. A spark of hope flared inside her. Her fingertips brushed the ground, searching for more. There, half buried beneath a slab of limestone, was a scrap of parchment, brittle and stained with time. Alara gingerly pulled it free. It curled at the edges, but the inked words remained clear. The jagged script was unmistakably her father's, loose but purposeful, jotted down in haste. "Beware the shadow beneath the shine. The lantern's light hides more than it reveals. Trust no guardian." A chill slithered down her spine. The very words echoed the doubts he had sown in her mind ever since his disappearance. A warning left in secret, meant to be found only if the light began to fail. Her breath caught, the weight of his absence settling around her like a suffocating cloak. Kale frowned, eyes scanning the ceiling. If he was here, then whoever silenced him, whoever sabotaged the lanterns, they might still be watching us, waiting. The cavern seemed to inhale in response, the shadows thickening as if stirred by suspicion. Alara felt the presence of unseen eyes, silent predators blending into the abyssal flora that surrounded them. The distorted shapes of thorny vines twined like serpents, and pulsing bulbs bobbed gently, their light a deceptive dance on the edge of perception. They pressed onward, deeper into the maze of stone and creeping darkness. The air grew heavier, thick with the damp scent of decay mixed with faint, acrid tangs from the abyssal growths. Every surface gleamed with a sickly sheen, as if the cavern itself was alive, watching, waiting. At a fork in the tunnel, Alara hesitated. The left passage was narrow, almost suffocating, walls closing in with veins of iridescent crystal cutting through the stone. The right was wider, but the air there vibrated faintly, carrying a low, almost inaudible hum. "This way," she decided, fingers tightening around the lantern. The light flared briefly, then steadied, casting long shadows that writhed like living things. The path opened onto a massive chamber. Stalactites dripped luminous liquid, pooling on the floor in shimmering puddles. The walls were etched with symbols, ancient runes intertwined with strange markings, half erased by time and corrosion. Some of the shapes pulsed faintly, glowing with a rhythm like a heartbeat. Kale stepped closer, tracing one rune with his fingertip. These are warnings, ancient ones, about the lanterns and the abyss beneath Hollowreach. Alara's eyes searched the far end of the room and froze. There, carved into the wall, was another message, large, urgent, almost frantic. It was her father's handwriting again, though older, more strained. They come from below, not shadows, but reflections. The abyss mirrors us, twisting, corrupting everything it touches. The lantern's light is a lie. It blinds. A sudden shiver ran through the cavern. The glowing pools stirred, ripples spreading outward like a breath. Tendrils of darkness seeped from the edges, entwining with the phosphorescent glow, corrupting the fragile light. Alara swallowed, drawing the lantern closer. The pale blue light wavered, as if struggling against unseen pressure. "We're running out of time," Kale said grimly. "If the abyss is spreading like this, the lantern won't hold much longer." "And if the conspiracy weaves this deep," Alara added softly, "then its roots are tangled through the entire city, through the very history my father tried to uncover." A sound scraped from the far reaches of the chamber, a faint scuff, a whispered breath against stone. Both spun toward it, weapons drawn, eyes searching the creeping darkness. Nothing moved, only the glow of corrupted pools, mockingly serene. Alara's throat tightened. "He left traces here for us, but he's not here now. Whoever came after him must have erased his path to safety. Or maybe they're still guarding it." Kale's voice dropped. "Then we walk right into their trap." The lantern's light flickered suddenly, low and erratic. A pulse of cold ran through Alara's veins, the weight of unseen watchers pressing down. The cavern held its secrets close, a history written in fear, betrayal, and shadows deeper than the abyss itself. She steeled herself. There was no turning back. The echoes of her father's warnings hung heavy in the air, like ghostly screams woven into stone and darkness. And somewhere beyond the light, the watchers waited. Alara sank to the cold stone floor of the chamber, the ancient journal trembling slightly in her hands. Its leather cover was worn, the edges frayed like the mind of its owner must have been, her father. She carefully turned the brittle pages, guided only by the faint glow of the lantern, now sputtering dangerously. Each line she read deepened the chill inside her, as the truth sprawled before her with the weight of a shattering revelation. The journal's entries chronicled months of her father's secret investigations, words scratched hurriedly, sometimes blotted with tears or ink smudged by frantic hands. He had discovered that the city's council, those who held the highest authority behind layers of oaths and rituals, were not helpless observers. They were actively draining the power from the lanterns. Alara's fingers froze upon one passage where her father described the mechanism. Hidden conduits siphoning the lantern's light, redirecting its energy not to the abyss's defense, but to themselves. Longevity, strength, and unnatural preservation. These were the true uses of the mirrored glow. "Draining," she whispered, voice fragile. "They steal from the city's lifeblood to fuel their own hunger." Kale crouched beside her, his face cast in bone-white light from the flickering lantern. "That explains why the southern lantern failed first. It's no accident. Someone wanted it to fail." "But why risk the whole city?" Alara's brows knit in confusion. "The abyss doesn't discriminate. Once the lanterns die, everything dies." Her father's writing answered in ink and blood. Control. The council used the fear of the abyss to tighten their grip, manipulating the people with false light while they fed in shadows, extending their lives and consolidating power deeper than the city's roots. Alara's stomach churned with rage and sorrow. The betrayal was not just political, it was primordial, staining the very core of Hollowreach's foundation. They had poisoned the lantern's glow itself, twisting the ritual sacred to all, imprisoning the city's hope in a lie. Another passage detailed the council's darkest secret, hidden beneath layers of stone and silence. Her father had found evidence of a chamber, lifeblood chambers, that siphoned and stored the lantern's energy, feeding an ancient device designed to preserve the council's immortality. The abyss was not just encroaching in nature, the council was actively inviting its presence, choosing personal survival over the city's fate. Alara slammed the journal shut, heart hammering against ribs like a desperate drumbeat. "They're sacrificing Hollowreach to save themselves. she said, voice tight as cold steel. And if the lanterns fail completely, the abyss won't just swallow the city, it'll swallow the world. Kale's hand rested on her shoulder, a rare softness in his usually hardened demeanor. We need proof. The council won't confess, not willingly. Her eyes darted back to the far wall, where the last message of her father's was carved in desperation. The abyss mirrors us, twisting, corrupting everything it touches. The lantern's light is a lie. It blinds. The words trembled with warning, but also hope. Hope that the truth might still save them. The flickering lantern suddenly dimmed further, shadows clawing at their edges. Alara's breath hitched as the pools of phosphorescent water rippled again, the corruption spreading slow but inevitable. The darkness was alive, as if sensing their discovery. We can't stay, Kale urged. If they know we have the journal, they'll come. Alara nodded, committing every word, every secret locked inside those fragile pages, to memory. The conspiracy was vast. The council's watchful eyes reached into every crevice of Hollowreach, stalking every shadow she dared to cross. But as the lantern's light waned, Alara's resolve hardened. The truth was a blade now, sharp, unstoppable. She had to expose them, or be consumed with the rest. A faint scuff echoed from the cavern's edge, rough and deliberate. Kale's grip tightened on his blade. Alara rose, lifting the journal as a talisman and a weapon, ready to face whatever waited beyond the corrupted glow. The abyss isn't just below us, she said, voice low and resolute. It's inside them, inside the city itself. Together they turned toward the ever-deepening darkness, stepping into the unknown. The watchers were no longer silent. The game had begun, and the shadows whispered their cruel invitation. The narrow tunnel yawned before them like the throat of some ancient beast, swallowed long ago by stone and silence. Alara's torch sputtered feebly against the damp air, its light barely touching the twisted walls that seemed to pulse with a slow, living breath. Kale moved ahead with deliberate steps, blade drawn but unused, eyes sharp in the flickering dark. "This is it," Alara whispered, barely daring to speak. "The forgotten lantern." Their father's map, brittle and worn, had led them here, beneath the city's oldest quarter, far beyond any path regularly trodden. It took all their courage and caution to navigate the collapsing corridors, where roots writhed like veins in the crumbling ceiling, and the scent of rot and ancient stone clung heavy around them. Then, like a secret revealed by time itself, the cavern opened. Massive, breath-stealing. The lantern lay dormant within a hollow vast enough to swallow a dozen men, its towering frame carved from midnight black basalt streaked with veins of iridescent crystal. It rose like a sentinel of forgotten days, sculpted with arcane symbols that shimmered faintly in the muted torchlight. Alara traced trembling fingers over its surface, cold beneath her touch, a relic of an age when magic was raw, unbound by fragile rites or human cowardice. But it was silent, lifeless. "I never imagined it would be so," Kale's voice faltered. "Big," Alara finished, awe sharpening her breath. "But bigger than we thought means more than just fire can wake it." The journal had hinted. The old ritual that kept the city's lanterns burning was a fragile veil, a lie built on corrupted magic. This ancient one demanded something different, something pure. "Alara," Kale said, voice low as the cavern around them, "your father wrote that lighting this lantern requires a sacrifice, not of flesh, but of energy, pure energy, a light carved from the soul itself." Her eyes widened and then narrowed, thoughts racing. The council had kept this hidden because such a sacrifice was impossible to bear, or because they feared the power it demanded would unravel their control. But Alara's breath hitched as the shadows deepened, curling like living fingers along the cavern floor. The abyss was pulsing, alive beneath, reacting to their intrusion. "We don't have time for fear," she said, steadying her voice, though her heart pounded against ribs that felt suddenly too tight. "If we don't relight it, the darkness will swallow Hollowreach entirely." Kale stepped closer to the towering lantern, examining the ancient runes etched deep into its base. "How do we offer such a sacrifice? The rituals in the journal, none mention this kind of energy, pure, uncorrupted." Alara's mind flashed back to the countless nights she spent training, days staring into the phosphorescent pools that mirrored the abyss. She remembered the glow inside her own chest, the ache and warmth of something not quite like light, but more, a pulse of raw life. "I think it's me," she said, voice fragile but growing firmer. "If the lantern demands pure energy, the only source I know is my own." Kale's gaze sharpened, worry flickering in his eyes. "Alara, you don't have to." "Don't!" She cut him off, her hands tightening into fists. "This is what Father was trying to protect us from, hiding the truth. I can't let him have died in vain." The cavern grew quieter still, as if holding its breath. Slowly, Alara raised her hands, palms facing the dormant lantern's towering core. She could feel the weight of the abyss pressing from below, cold and hungry, but also a counterforce humming within her, an ember alive with determination and light. A shiver ran through her, the energy twisting like a coil inside, aching to be released. The runes flickered blue and gold, awakening with reluctant hunger. Kale watched, silent and solemn, as Alara focused every shard of her will, every glowing thread of hope, into the vast ancient lantern. A low hum filled the cavern, rising in pitch and power until the very air trembled. Then, with a sound like the cracking of the world itself, a surge of light exploded from the lantern's blackened heart. It spilled out in waves, warm, blinding, pure, washing against the cavern walls, and for a moment, the abyss seemed to reel back, shrinking from the radiance. Alara gasped, every ounce of strength draining as her vision blurred at the edges with searing flashes of white-hot light. The lantern's fire was alive, soulful in a way the corrupted city lanterns never were, casting glow that revealed ancient glyphs and warnings woven into the stone ceiling. But as the light steadied, Alara collapsed to her knees, trembling and depleted. Kale caught her before she fell, low and urgent. "You did it! The lantern's lit!" Her breath was shallow, her body a raw vessel drained by the power she had given, but her spirit burned brighter than ever. The abyss was retreating, pushed back a little farther into shadow. Outside the cavern, she knew the fight was far from over. Yet beneath the terrifying weight of sacrifice, Alara felt a single fierce truth. Some flames could not be extinguished, not without those brave enough to burn first. The cavern beyond the lantern chamber yawned wide, swallowing the faint glow Alara carried. The air was thick with moisture and the sharp scent of brine, heavy with the salt of the abyssal water lapping somewhere in the blackness beneath. She moved cautiously, each step muffled against slick stone, every breath slow and deliberate to keep from announcing her presence. Kale followed silently, his eyes narrowing in the dim light, scanning every shadow and crevice. Between whispers, the cavern groaned, a low, guttural rumble that vibrated beneath their feet like a frightened beast stirred from deep sleep. Somewhere ahead, a wet, shuffling sound slipped through the darkness, brittle and unnatural. Alara's pulse quickened. The warnings carved into the ancient stones haunted her mind. The guardian stakes its claim, twisted by the abyss's hunger. No blade may pierce the Shadowborn. They were not alone. Ahead, glimpses of black shimmered beneath the stagnant pools, scaling slick rocks with ease. The creature emerged in brief flickers, an immense silhouette shifting with ragged, dripping limbs, eyes glowing faintly like drowned stars. It was impossible to look directly, as if the abyss itself had worn flesh to guard the lantern's deepest roots. Alara gripped the chain hanging from her belt, a sliver of iron blessed by the city's temple. But she knew it would be of no use against this thing. The guardian before them was not just beast or man. It was corrupted by the dark below, a thing warped beyond reason or mercy. Fighting it would be death. "Stealth," she whispered, voice dry as the cavern's silent walls. "We can't." Before she finished, Kale raised a finger to his lips, eyes sharp in the gloom. The creature's heavy breathing echoed, a wet rasp hurting the stillness like a blade scraping bone. "We move through the water," Kale murmured, pointing toward the edge of a shallow tidal pool. "It hates disturbance, but it senses vibrations. We follow the rocks, keep steady, and slip past while it hunts for movement in the dark." Alara nodded, swallowing her fear. Her heart hammered in rhythm with the slow drip of distant water, each drop a frozen moment stretched between shadow and waiting. She padded forward, bare feet finding purchase on cold stone, careful to avoid loose gravel or jutting edges that could betray their progress. The guardian shifted suddenly, a vast, hulking figure rising, limbs unfolding in grotesque angles. Its breath burst forth like a curse, a wet stench of decay and salt. Alara froze, pressed herself flat against the rock face as the dark mass loomed close. A slow, rasping growl rolled through the cavern, accompanied by the scrape of claws sliding over stone. The creature's head tilted, as if sniffing the creeping scent of her blood, its eyes flashing with hungry recognition. The lantern's light behind her pulsed faintly, a heartbeat hidden beneath the abyss's choking weight. Her skin prickled ice cold. If it found her, if it tore into her, the entire ritual would unravel. The city's salvation would drown in shadow. Kale whispered, voice trembling with suppressed panic. Don't move, we wait for its senses to drift. Minutes passed, stretched thin, each breath a thunderclap in Alara's chest. The guardian turned, the chittering noise of its breath fading back into the darkness, moving downstream toward a cluster of glowing fungus that flickered like dying stars. Relief was a ghost. They were far from safe. We go now, Alara breathed, one step at a time. They slipped forward, weaving between jagged stalactites and spiderweb-thin veins of luminous crystal that hummed faintly under her touch. The air thickened as they rounded a bend, the cavern narrowing to a suffocating corridor. Water pooled deeper here, swirling dark and slow. Kale kneeled, testing the surface. We follow the submerged path, against the current. It won't expect us to come from the deep. Hands barely breaking the surface, they plunged into the cold, their bodies swallowed by the abyss's chill. Alara's breath caught as the water pressed cold against her skin, numbing but steadying her nerves. Below the surface, flickers of light traced ancient glyphs etched into submerged stone, messages left by those who had fought the same darkness centuries ago. They moved like ghosts, silent and unseen, until the water sloped upward, and the cavern opened to a towering alcove where the final lantern rested on its pedestal. But between them and salvation, the guardian stilled once more, rising like a nightmare woven of stone and shadow. Its eyes locked onto the faintest ripple in the water, the ghost of their passage. Alara's heart threatened to shatter the stillness, but her lips moved in a silent vow. This time, not a fight of strength, but of patience and cunning. She glanced at Kale, no more need for words. The cavern hummed, the abyss waiting, watching, a breath away from swallowing all light. Carefully, inch by inch, they edged forward, weaving through the folds of shadow, the guardian's grotesque form a constant menace, tethered to the abyss from which it had risen. The deeper truth gleamed beyond. The lantern, still alive in the dark, still fighting its endless war. And Alara, steady, unyielding, was ready to face whatever waited, silent and watchful, beneath the guardian's cold, unblinking gaze. Alara's skin prickled, cold droplets clinging stubbornly to her arms as she pressed forward through the shallow pool. The water was ice cold, biting at her lungs every time she stilled her breath. The cavern seemed to breathe with a life of its own, its pulse a deep, thudding hum beneath her feet, through the bones of the earth and the hollow of her chest. Above her, the jagged ceiling of rock glimmered faintly with veins of phosphorescent crystal, casting eerie blue shadows that twisted like smoke across the dark water. Ahead, on its pedestal carved from ancient stone, the lantern sat, faintly glowing with a sputtering ember of life. The ivory metalwork was etched with faded runes, and the glass flickered as if a dying candle flicked in the wind. The southern lantern was meant to burn eternal, a beacon against the creeping dark, but now it shuddered on the edge of extinction. Between Alara and the lantern, the guardian loomed, a monstrous sentinel of chiseled stone and curling dark mist. Its cracked, jagged form towered like a petrified nightmare, limbs folded in unyielding vigilance. Its hollow eyes, vast wells of shadow, tracked every ripple of water as if it could sense the pulse of their very souls. It moved not with brute force, but calculated patience, waiting for the moment to strike should they make the simplest sound. Alara held her breath, a single slow breath that filled her lungs and steadied her racing heart. This isn't about strength, she whispered, voice fragile in the oppressive silence. It's about balance, control. Kale nodded, close beside her, eyes sharp. His movements were tempered, deliberate. They had learned the rhythm of this place, the shifting threat beneath the stone and water, and for now, the silence held. Elara stepped closer to the pedestal, careful to stay in the thin shadow of a crystalline outcrop that fractured the guardian's line of sight. Her fingers brushed the cold metal of the lantern, trembling. The light inside burned low, too low to fend off the swelling abyss. Here, Kale said, pulling from his satchel a small crystal vial filled with shimmering liquid blue, the distilled essence of the cavern's bioluminescence. This is the key, pure light from the deep, but it won't hold spark without something more. Alara's mind raced. The ancient scrolls her father left behind hinted at a force beyond light and stone, something vital and terrifying. Life itself, the spark of living breath. The air thickened, cold and heavy, as if the cavern itself tensed against her next move. Closing her eyes, Alara drew a slow, shuddering breath and pressed both palms to the lantern's cool frame. The cold bit deep, sinking through her skin, her veins. She searched inward, finding that faint flame buried beneath fear and fatigue, the thrumming pulse of blood, the steady drum of a heart that would not yield. She felt it stir, a warmth that bloomed like a fragile ember in the black night of her chest. The cavern responded, as if recognizing the offering. The faint blue glow in the vial pulsed, flickering. The veins of crystal above shivered, humming in harmony as bioluminescent threads wove upward from the liquid, tendrils of light rising like spectral wraiths. Alara's breath hitched as the guardian's eyes flickered toward her, a storm gathering in its hollow gaze. It had sensed the shift, the subtle change in the ritual's rhythm. The ancient sentinel stirred, limbs creaking like ancient timbers straining against a storm. But Alara was no longer afraid. She closed her fingers around the vial, tilting it carefully to pour the glowing liquid into the heart of the lantern. The faint light inside began to pulse, slowly at first, then with growing brilliance. She poured the warmth of her own life into it, quiet and steady, feeling the tether tighten between her breath and the lantern's flickering flame. Her skin prickled with a sharp ache, the life force draining, a sacrifice coaxed from the marrow of her being. Yet it was a sacrifice born of purpose, of will. The cavern seemed to stretch, dark waters rippling outward as the glow intensified, bleeding softly across the abyss. The lantern flared suddenly, a beacon alive with pure, raw light that cut through the gloom like a spear. The runes along its frame shimmered, igniting with a forgotten magic that whispered in an ancient tongue. The guardian froze, caught in the sudden blaze, its dark form fracturing with the sudden influx of radiance. The shadowy tendrils that writhed from its limbs recoiled, shrinking against the blooming light. For a moment, the colossal figure seemed to wail silently, a tortured giant bound in stone and shadow. Kale exhaled quietly, eyes wide with disbelief and relief. You did it. Alara's hands shook as the glow settled into a steady, unwavering burn. Exhaustion crashed over her in waves, the cost of the ritual real and immediate. But the light was strong, strong enough to cut into the abyss, a stave in the encroaching dark. Around them the cavern exhaled. The water stilled, the crystal veins thrummed with renewed energy. The abyss hesitated, retreating like a beast wounded but not yet slain. Alara slid to her knees, fingers tracing the lantern's base. It's only the beginning, she murmured. But for now, the flame is ours. The guardian, now still once more, crouched in the shadows, watching. Its silence was a warning. The abyss was waiting, and so was Lismere. The light surged upward, a brilliant shaft piercing the cavern ceiling and spilling into the streets above like a silver lance. For a brief heartbeat, the city of Lismere held its breath beneath the lantern's radiance, as if the pulse of the ancient magic had breathed life back into every stone and shadow. The darkness, dense and restless for so long, recoiled with a hiss that echoed like distant thunder through the hollow arches and twisting alleys. Alara's knees pressed into the cold stone as the warmth of the lantern expanded. The glow rippled outward in waves, unspooling through the veins of the city like liquid fire. Windows flickered open, the ritual cast stone to sky, a shockwave in the veins of Lismere that left no corner untouched. The air trembled with the hum of ancient runes reawakening, their language a susurrus of forgotten power. Whispers chased each other along rooftops, carried on the pulse of light and hope, and yet beneath that whisper, a deeper sound stirred, an awakening grudging, uneasy. Somewhere beyond the farthest spires, the council's chambers stirred with sudden urgency. Councilors who had argued in measured tones moments before now whispered sharp orders, their eyes narrowing against the rising glare visible even through their thick windows. It was as if the light itself had branded their location, tearing through the city's usual night shroud to reveal the council's hidden haven, their sanctuary stripped bare. Elara knew it the moment she saw it. This was the signal she'd hoped for, but at a terrible cost. The ancient lantern's flare was no mere illumination. It summoned watchers, eyes that had slumbered beneath the weight of stone and pretense. The very council they sought to expose was now on high alert, alerted to their presence with a precision that chilled her blood. Cale crouched beside her, his breath ragged in the stillness. "They've seen us," he said, voice low but steady. "They know where we are." Alara's fingers tightened around the lantern's base. The pulse of magic thrummed through her, raw and unyielding, a tether not just of light but of resolve. "Then they'll come," she answered quietly, eyes scanning the shadows where the cavern's edges seemed to pulse with a restless hunger. "But we hold the light, for now." Above them, the brilliance began to wane, but the flickering afterglow lingered, suffusing the air with a fragile hope. The abyss, still held at bay, churned with a fury that promised it would not be kept at bay forever. Tendrils of darkness stretched along the mist-layered streets, seeking cracks in the sanctuary of stone and flame. From the cavern's depths, a low rumble echoed, as if the earth itself mourned the lantern's defiance. The guardian stirred then, massive in the gloom, its fractured form silhouetted against the fading glow. The shadowy creature flexed against its bonds, its eyes glinting with anger and something stranger, recognition. It saw the flare as both threat and memory, the light rekindling a bond severed long ago. "Elara," Cale murmured, voice tight with urgency. "We don't have long." She nodded, exhaustion clawing at her limbs, but there was no room for doubt. Rising slowly, she moved toward the narrow stone passage that led back into the twisting veins of Lismere beneath the city. Every step was heavy with the knowledge that the council's agents would soon flood the streets, their faces hidden, but their intent unmistakable. As the light faded to a steady glow, the cavern's shadows returned, denser than before. The aftershock of the lantern's flare seemed to leave behind a hollow silence, broken only by the distant clatter of footsteps, a soft, deliberate approach through the tunnels below. Alara's heart hammered, her breath shallow. She cast one last glance at the ancient flame, now flickering like a fragile star caught between worlds. The abyss was retreating for a moment, but the watchers were closing in, their presence a reminder that this fragile victory was but the first in a long war. Outside the chamber, the city responded. Lanterns along the winding streets ignited in quiet succession, their glow a whispered promise that the ritual had not failed. Yet with each light kindled, the council's shadow deepened, watchers emerging like ghosts from the stone, closing in on the source. The shockwave had been sent. The abyss might recoil, but it was also a beacon, a flare that would draw both friend and foe into the unfolding darkness. Elara swallowed the rising fear and turned toward the encroaching passage, the lantern's light steady in her hand, a fragile bulwark against a city slipping further into shadow. The fight was far from over, but for this moment, the darkness had been pushed back. "It's begun," she said, voice low and resolute. "They know, and so do we." The stale air of the cavern pressed against Alara's lungs as she and Cale moved deeper into the labyrinthine tunnels beneath Lismere. Every step echoed softly against the jagged walls, swallowed quickly by the hollow silence. The weight of the lantern in her hand was at once a comfort and a burden, a faint pulse of light against the suffocating dark. Behind them, the flickering flare of the ancient flame still lingered faintly in the chamber where the ritual had been reborn. but it was a moment seized only briefly. The council's agents, silent as serpents, were already threading the city's veins like a slow poison. Somewhere in the shadows, the soft scrape of booted feet warned of the hunters closing in. "Kale," Alara whispered, voice raw with exhaustion yet sharp with urgency. "How far to the surface?" He glanced back once, eyes narrowed but steady. "Another hour, maybe less if we push, but the tunnels are twisted near the old ascent. I don't like it." She nodded, tightening her grip on the lantern. The true light pulsed faintly, steady and warm, a living thing born from secrets and sacrifices. It was the rebuke to the failing southern lantern, the spark that could ignite the city's salvation or doom it entirely. The climb began in earnest then, a long spiral of narrow stone steps carved generations ago into the bedrock beneath Lismere. Moss and time had claimed the lower stretches, making each foothold uncertain. Alara's boots scuffed against the worn edges as she forced herself upward, muscles aching with the effort. Kale kept pace silently beside her, ever watchful, his hand never far from the hilt at his side. A cold draft whispered around them, a breath from the surface, or the stirrings of something darker. Shadows stretched and twisted along the walls, black tendrils in the dim lantern glow. Alara's heart skipped as a faint scrape echoed ahead. "They're following," Kale murmured, voice steady but low. "We can't let them catch us here." She nodded sharply. "We'll have to be faster and quieter." The twisting ascent took them past old masonry, half-fallen arches carved with the weathered sigils of the lantern keepers. These were the bones of a city long forgotten by those who ruled above, traps of history and betrayal etched in stone. Alara traced the worn edges with shaking fingers, seeing her father's hand in the work. The truth pulsed beneath these walls, and now she carried it with her like a fragile flame. A sudden noise, a scrape of metal against stone, made her freeze. She pressed back against the wall, breath caught in her throat. Kale mirrored her, stepping into the shadow beside her. From the dark ahead came a faint muttering, the slip of voices carried on the cold air. "No trace of her yet," one hissed. "Keep moving. The light must not reach the surface." Alara's pulse slammed, the weight of the lantern suddenly heavier. They were not just hunted by faceless enemies, but by those sworn to extinguish the light itself. The council's reach was deeper than she had feared, a poison spreading in the veins of the city. "Follow my lead," Kale said, sliding out from the shadows. He flicked his wrist, and a shard of flint kissed steel, sending a brief spark into the darkness. A tiny flash, silent but bright, cast fleeting shapes on the tunnel walls. With a soft grunt, he unleashed a cloud of smoke, powder and herbs burning hot and fast. The smoke billowed suddenly, thick and choking, clinging to the stone, blurring shapes into smudges. The pursuers' voices turned to curses and confusion. Alara seized the moment. They moved, faster now, the climb a desperate scramble against the rising danger. The smoke wreathed behind them, their passage marked by whispered chaos. Higher and higher they went. The air grew thinner, lighter with the breath of the city above. The walls narrowed, squeezing tighter as the final stretch approached, a forgotten stairwell sealed by rusted iron bars in the deep bowels of the ancient ruins. "There," Kale said, voice strained. He drew a slender dagger, blade song flashing briefly as he sliced through the locks. The barrier fell open with a reluctant groan, a passage into the night air and the sprawling cityscape beyond. From the fissure of the tunnel, the first chill of the surface struck Alara like a splash of ice, cool winds carrying the scent of rain and distant fires. Above, she glimpsed the pale curve of the moon, hung low in the ink-black sky. But the city was not safe yet. Figures flitted below, the council's watchers moving with patient menace through the twisting streets. Their cloaks were darkness incarnate, faces hidden beneath hoods, eyes gleaming with a cold fire. They had not forgotten, would not relent. Kale glanced upward, then back to Alara. "We have what we came for. Now we bring the truth to the light." She raised the lantern high. Its flame flared strong, searing through the night, carving a path forward. The city beneath lay shadowed and trembling, but the light was a promise, both a weapon and a warning. "We climb," Alara said, voice steady despite the tremble